You are listening to Leading the Factory Forward with your host, Lynn Friest. We share interviews with manufacturing experts and strategies for embracing the digital future, recruiting a new workforce, finding new business. Lynn is an advanced manufacturing strategist and leadership consultant who is on a mission to show manufacturing leaders how to improve their current operations while preparing for a digital future. And here's your host, Lynn Friest.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Leading the Factory Forward. This is episode number 37, and it talks about habits of mind. Now, this is the first part of our series on developing your leadership foundations. And there'll be 4 parts to this series. And I've talked about some of these ideas in earlier podcasts, but I wanted to expand on them in this series. The reason would be is to develop new habits of thinking, new habits of action, to help you create focus, energy, and momentum in your development and in your organization. The goal here is to help you build your leadership skills, not only for yourself and your organization, but also to help you prepare for an uncertain and difficult future. So the 4 parts of this series are going to be habits of mind or habits of thinking in this episode. The next episode will be habits of action. How do you actually put all this into play? Then we'll talk about, how do you create focus, energy, and momentum? So this is more about that idea of deep work and really creating focused work. And then finally, in the last episode, we'll talk about what are the skills you need to lead both yourself and others. Again, this is part of the emotional intelligence package. What are the skills you need not only for your own development, but developing how you lead others? So in this episode, there are going to be 3 broad areas that we'll talk about in terms of what will be your habits of mind for 2020. The first area we'll talk about is how you view yourself. The second one will be how you view the world. The third will be how you interact with the world. So let's get started. How do you view yourself? How are you today versus yesterday? And this is the whole idea of you're just getting yourself better. It's not a thing where you're trying to compare yourself to someone else. It's, have I gotten better today than yesterday? Not, am I as good as or better than somebody else who is at another point in their journey in life? It's really just focusing on, are you better today than yesterday? And I think a lot of this starts with the basic ideas around mindfulness and routines and habits. And so what are the mindfulness steps that you could take to, again, how do you view yourself? And some of this gets back to, we know you're manufacturing leaders, you're action-oriented, but can you just be still and not think? In other words, be still, and whether it be listen or just be still in your mind, I guess. And again, part of this adds on to then, can you help build space in your thinking so that you're better able to choose as all the things hit you and come at you from different directions? Can you build that pause in your reaction time or that pause so that you can actually be effective in what you're doing? So I want to give you just an example of what I've done in terms of routines or habits. So I've adopted a morning routine, and it consists of several steps. The first thing I do in the morning is meditate for about 20 minutes. And again, while I've been at this for a while, I'm sometimes better at it and sometimes not so good at it. But the whole idea of meditation is basically sit quietly for 20 minutes and try not to be thinking about all the things you have to do today, but just be quiet, listening, be still. Now, the next thing I do is more active. I actually just write 3 pages of free-form writing, whatever I'm thinking about. It's not planning my day or anything like that. It's just, often it's how I feel. What did I think about? Did I wake up a lot last night? Whatever is coming to mind, and I'm just writing 3 pages, and then I stop. And it doesn't mean anything, doesn't have to be used. I don't even go back and reread them. I just write, and that helps, again, clear my mind with some of the stuff that's swirling around in it. And the next step for me is I read a page from a book called The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. And again, it's a short half-page thing talking about this Stoic lifestyle and practices. And again, it could be anything that you want to do. That just is something that's resonated with me. Then following that, I do some short spiritual readings. Again, nothing special about that. It's just part of my habit. It's useful and nourishing to me to do that. Now, the next step is I go through a startup sequence. In other words, literally starting up my computer, kind of organizing my work. And I'll say that this piece of it is still very much a work in progress. I don't think I'm as effective on this as I could be because, sometimes I sit down and write 3 things I'm going to do today or review a card I wrote to myself for what are the 3 things I plan to do this week. But again, this one is still a work in progress. Then following that startup sequence, I try to do a focus session and try to do those throughout the morning. So I try to do a 25-minute focus session. Now, this is really a beginning practice for me, and I have not been consistent, but it's the kind of thing I keep striving for. How can I keep coming back to it? At least try it each day, even though I haven't been always successful on it. So again, that's just a quick review of routine that, again, helps quiet my mind in the morning, as well as empty out some thinking that I've got in the morning, and then go through a specific routine to try to get the day off to a good start. Now, another habit of mind comes from James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits, and it talks about what's your identity. And he has this idea where there's your identity, there's the habits and routines you have, and then there are goals that you have in life. And he says it's kind of a cycle through all of these. Sometimes you start with your goals and build your routines, and then that helps shape your identity. But also sometimes you just start focusing on what's my identity, and then use that to build routines, and eventually then goals are going to come out of that. So again, this is just an idea of how do you have something for a habit of mind that you might have. So in this idea of identity, some of it is just declaring. So I might declare I am a change agent, or I am a podcaster, or I am a leader of the future. So it's just about declaring this is what I am. Then what are the routines that would help support me in that? What are the goals that I need to set so that I can really achieve this identity for myself? Again, as leaders, we're going to be doing something different. We're going to be learning. And as some of my friends have challenged me as I learn new things in this whole business of leadership and coaching, can I practice in public? And when I do that, my mistakes are going to show and I'm going to be vulnerable. And this whole idea of vulnerability comes back to some work by Brené Brown. And one of her current books is Dare to Lead. But it's the idea of, especially when there's uncertain times, when we have to change, when we have to learn, can we show our vulnerability? Often as leaders, people may think we know all the answers, and we don't. But can we let people know we're working through this just like they are? The last piece of this identity piece comes from a book, The Corporate Athlete. And this gets to the whole idea. Again, it's one of my statements of identity is I'm a corporate athlete. And as an athlete, I need to acknowledge that there needs to be a rhythm in my life. I'm not always performing. Sometimes I have to recover. Sometimes I have to plan. So I have to acknowledge that there's that rhythm. And at different times and different stages of life, it will be different. Along with acknowledging the rhythm, I have to acknowledge that there are different elements of well-being as a corporate athlete, whether it be health, whether it be exercise, whether it be diet, whether it be family, whether it be friends. What are the different elements of well-being for me to become the leader I want to be? And again, considering myself as a corporate athlete, I'm just not a human doing, but also a human being. Because if all I'm doing is doing, it's just not going to work out in the long run. So the second section of this podcast is how do you view the world? And with that, I go to a book called Mindset by Carol S. Dweck. And this idea of, do I have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Do I consider things to be a pie of the fixed size? Or is there opportunity out there we can have two pies to work on, not just fight over slices of one pie? Or the concept that what I don't know is a matter of I don't know how to do something yet. It's not that I can't do it or I won't be able to do it. I just don't know how to do it yet. The flip side of that, of course, is we often feel as leaders, we're supposed to have all the answers. And in fact, as I've said earlier, that's really not the case, especially in an uncertain and volatile world. And then the final piece of this, having a growth versus a fixed mindset, is really, will I be an actor or will I be a victim? If I tend to have a fixed mindset, I'll tend to say, other things have control. But in fact, I can choose to be an actor. It doesn't mean I can have control over things, but I can choose to be an actor. It's like in the book from Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning. He was in a concentration camp, and he said, I couldn't decide every day whether I was going to live or die, but I could choose every day how I was going to set my mind, how I was going to choose my attitude, how I was going to help people that day in whatever way I could. So again, it's the idea of I'll be the actor and not the victim. Also, when you think about how you view the world, consider that I have something to offer with my voice, my perspective, and I can serve what someone else needs. I can offer something that someone else needs to know. And as a leader, that's probably a lot of my job, is to help others make sense of the world, learn how to work in the new world, learn how to do new activities, new tools, new technologies. So as a leader, our role is to help others, again, make sense of the world and actually act in the world. The third area is thinking about how you interact with the world. And this will kind of bleed over into our next podcast where it's habits of action. But just to kind of, again, it's really about how you set your mind on these things. Again, jumping back to the Atomic Habits book, the goal there is can I find a way, can I consider how to be 1% better each day? Can I think about how do I make a succession of small steps every day? How do I make 365 small steps to be a little bit better each day? Can I have that mindset? Another piece of that mindset and interacting with the world is acknowledging that there's a messy middle out there. The analogy I always use is making sausage is not very pretty, but usually people enjoy the outcome, the spices, the seasoning, and all that. The actual making of it is just not a very pretty process. Then also I would refer back to some earlier things I talked about with how do you approach change? And this is from William Bridges in his Managing Transitions. He says there are three elements in change. There's the ending, the letting go of the old, there's the neutral zone, and then there's the new beginnings. So as a leader, can I help my people get through the ending, the losing, the letting go of what we were doing before? And it can be very hard because that's what made us successful. And now we have to let go of what was making us successful. And the neutral zone is that messy middle where we're not really doing it the new way. We're still kind of doing it the old way. But that is where the opportunity arrives to really create, using elements maybe of the old to create something new and even better. And then finally, the new beginnings, where you're really fully focused on the new beginnings. And we, as leaders, have to consciously help ourselves and our people say, I'm not going to spend any focus more on the old methods, processes, technology. We're putting all of our focus on the new. Another idea with, again, how you interact with the world is, are you as a leader looking over the horizon? Not just about what has to happen today, what has to happen this week, or the things that just keep showing up at our desk every day. Have you got a perspective that you're going to look over the horizon at what needs to happen in the future? And I think the final element of how you interact with the world gets into, and I use some examples from improv comedy. And there's a book called Yes And by Kelly Leonard and Tom Yorton. They were with Second City. And the premise of this book is in the title, that we should have a mindset of saying, yes, and we can do this. Whereas in the past, we've often said, yes, but that's why it won't work. So the idea is, yes, and here's another opportunity. Not yes, and here's why it won't work. Another quote from Woody Allen on this same kind of an idea is, showing up is 90% of success. In other words, we have to be present in what's ever happening and believe that we can work our way through it. But we have to show up. We can't hold back. We can't avoid it. We have to just show up and work with what's there in front of us. So in the last piece here, I want to kind of review 4 lenses. Again, I used this in an earlier podcast, but as you look at your work, here are 4 different ways that you might, again, have a habit of mind about looking at your work. The first one is from the book Do More Great Work by Michael Bungay Stanier, and it's the great work, good work, and bad work idea. Great work is work that's transformational, both for yourself and for your organization. You don't spend all your time on that, but you do have to make time somehow for that. Good work is more what I'd call the execution. It's the known work. It's the things we do every day. We have to keep doing them. They are really required. And we have to be good at doing good work. But we have to be concerned about the tyranny of the urgent. Does good work wipe out all the great work that we could be doing? Or is there 20% of our time that could be focused on the great work, while 80% of our time is focused on the good work? And then, of course, there's the bad work. And this is work that has little or no value. And in practice, what I often found bad work is often things like old reports, meetings, old processes. You know, we've all had that experience of the zombie meetings that seem to go on and nobody can remember why or what's the purpose for them. That second lens that I talked about was the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. And that really gets into, we can't have 25 top commitments. We really have to think about what are really the top 5. We may have fewer people to work with than we had before. We have new commitments that may have come in. But we have to really boil it down to where's the highest value added activity. And in different times, it may be the transformational work or it could be the execution work. But in any case, you have to really think about if there's 25 things that you kind of have, what are the top 5? That's always going to be there. Jim Collins, who's the author of Good to Great, said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have no priorities. So somewhere along the line, whether we intentionally make priorities or we unintentionally make them, they're going to be made. That third lens is about where's your energy. You have to really think about what gives you power? What gives you energy? What pulls you forward? And the question I use in that is, what makes you mad and what makes you sad? These are the things that get at your emotions more so than just what's the task in front of you. Again, mad is where something's missing, it's wrong, you wished it wasn't that way. Well, how can you change it? What makes you sad is quite similar. It's the things that, again, people are suffering out there, the organization is suffering. What are the things you can do that really energize you to make that better? Finally, the fourth lens, again, is achieving leaders. Can we move from personal achievement to a commitment to others? That higher level of achievement or focus. And a lot of my thoughts on this in that earlier podcast came from a book called The Second Mountain by David Brooks. It's the idea of being good as well as doing good. And the being good is something we want to have principles, we want to follow what we believe in, but also how can we help the world, other organizations, our teammates in terms of being good for themselves. And again, instead of being focused on our own happiness or success, it's also how do we help others achieve happiness and success. And a couple of his ideas in terms of this, having that higher need, is he talks about, well, what are your commitments to vocation, your work? What's your commitments to marriage, family? What commitment do you have to some sort of a philosophy or faith? What are the principles that are guiding your life? Do you really understand them and are you committed to them? And then finally, a commitment to community. And he has an interesting thing in there. He talks about community versus tribes. In his view, tribes are fear-sponsored. In other words, I'm worried about the outside world as a threat to me and the people like me. Contrasting that to a spirit of community where I acknowledge the diversity of the world around me and how can we find common grounds for us all to live together and accomplish more in life. So having gone through those ideas, what are some first steps that you can start on? First was, how do you view yourself? So again, I would recommend, what are your morning routines? How do you fit mindfulness? How do you create habits that are supportive of you getting off to a great start in the day? And again, you have a morning routine, whatever it is, there probably is one there already. Well, how can you add small pieces of that? And it may only be something as taking 3 deep breaths, or it could be as simple as writing 1 page or 5 sentences of just what are the first thoughts that occur to you in the morning. But again, what can you do in the morning to improve how your day starts? The next concept was, how do you view the world? And with that, I refer you back to that. Do you have a growth mindset or do you have a fixed mindset? You can change that, but it takes some attention sometimes. Then lastly, in thinking about how you interact with the world, what's the 1% better each day that you can make? What is that small succession of steps that if you really pay attention to doing 1 or 2 small things every day, it's going to move you towards that goal. And after 365 of those small steps, you'll be much farther along. So that wraps up this episode. And again, the next topics in the series are going to be about habits of mind. The next one is habits of action. How do you create focus, energy, and momentum? And then what are the skills to help you lead yourself and others? So just in review for this episode, it was, how will you view yourself? How will you view the world? How will you interact with the world? Thanks again for listening, and please remember to download the PDFs that are associated with this episode, and also the links that I have provide additional resources and learning for you, and I recommend them highly to you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.